Like a grand and miraculous spaceship, our planet has sailed through the universe of time.
Like a grand and miraculous spaceship.
Grand and miraculous.
Grand and miraculous.
I think with the Muppets, there's sort of an innocence to them, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that appeals to the child in everybody. Because I think everybody is a child in everybody still.
Well, we all want to build a time machine, Doc. So when you enter Disneyland, you're entering a time machine.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Hey everybody, it's John, Spaceship Ears here. Welcome to Grand and Miraculous. We're at episode 18. Can you believe it? That's incredible. Thank you so much for being here. It was great chatting with folks in chat. I see so many good friends here, so many wonderful names that I see around the YouTubes. I noticed YouTube gremlins are back, so your full name isn't being shown. It seems to be showing your username, but I'll do my best to try to recognize you all. And I want to welcome all of you here. For those of you who haven't been here before, this is Grand and Miraculous. This is our series which attempts to dissect the theme park attractions that we all know and love. And tonight we're going to tackle a very special one that many people love, Test Track, because it's a natural conclusion after we talked about World of Motion last time. So before I get into it, I just want to say hi to some folks in chat, especially those folks who have been here from many minutes ago, who have been supporters of the channel all along. Mr. Lamont Grades, great to see you. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Timothy Rainwaters, it's great to see you. It was great to see you a few weeks ago, and I really appreciate you guys being here tonight. Let's see here. Mike Beachman is in the house. Hey, Mike, hope you're doing great. Let's see. Udalali Lane, Kate, great to see you. Thank you for all your support. Miss K. Bell, my stepmom, hope you're doing well. I saw Mr. Jason Thibodeau in the house. Jason, thank you so much for all your support, as always. Let's see who else is in the house. Designs for Film. That's my dad, folks. So say hi to Designs for Film. Let's see who else is here. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Monorail Molly is in the house. Thank you, Monorail Molly, for all your support. Can't believe we're at episode 18. It's incredible. Let's see. Beaker and Honeydew is in the house. Great to see you. You're in Australia? That's incredible. Wow, thanks for logging in from all the way over there. Hope it's not the middle of the night. Let's see. Izzo's Place is in the house. Izzo, thank you so much for being here. Paula Rainwaters is in the house. Thank you, Paula. Appreciate your compliments. I love the opening too, and you can see a full res version of it on our channel if you're curious and you want to watch it again. Let's see. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. I might be missing some folks, but if I missed you, oh, Mr. Neil's in the house. Listen, Neil, Disney family. Hey, Neil, hope you're doing great. And Magic Adventures. Hey, Magic Adventures. Great to have you. Karen Cook. Hi, Karen. Hope you're doing great. Whew, I think I got everybody, but I might be missing some folks. So if I did, I apologize. I will come back to you. Hey, folks, big news. We're at 484 subs. Please do me a favor. Please hit like, hit subscribe, share out the stream, all the usual stuff that you hear about. We're very close to 500 subs, and that's a big milestone for us. So it would be great if you could help us across that finish line. So in case you haven't watched the show before, let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing here. Our mission statement on this show is to unveil the magic behind theme park attractions, exploring their creators, their immersive worlds, and the moments that keep us coming back, with your voice shaping the journey. And I want to emphasize the latter part. I reflected a little bit on the past few episodes. I often say that on this show, it's not my intention to sit here and preach for 60 minutes. However, I went back and I watched some old shows, and I'm a big old hypocrite because that's exactly what I did over the last few shows. So I'm going to try to mix things up a little bit tonight. I'm going to try and make it a little bit more interactive and a little bit more fun. So at times throughout tonight, I'll throw it out to chat and I'll ask a question, and we'll see if we can have some fun along the way. So I apologize if I got a little bit preachy in the last few episodes. I'm going to try and change it up tonight and try and make it a little bit more fun. So as always, if you have feedback, if you have comments, please send it my way. I'm happy to acknowledge it. I always like to start off the show with some trivia. Tonight we're talking about Test Track. And of course, Test Track is the fastest ride on Disney property. The question is, how many miles per hour does it top out at? If you actually ride the ride, you'll actually know the answer to this because it displays it right in big, bold colors as you enter the final stretch. But if you know the answer, go ahead and drop it in chat and we'll confirm it later on. I also want to encourage you to go and chat and share your memories of this attraction. A lot of memories over the years. And Test Track, as we'll talk about, actually has 3 different versions. So it's almost like 3 different attractions we'll talk about tonight. So you're getting 3 in 1 tonight. As always, I like to encourage you to go to our website. It's grandmiraculous.com. There's no and, just grandmiraculous.com. And you can actually contribute your voice. So I'll be talking about the 3 pillars that we use to distinguish how we tear apart these attractions. And you're encouraged to go to the website as well and to contribute your vote. Tonight's code to vote is TTGM. I was very tempted to use the code TEST, but I realized that might be a little bit too obvious and the robots might pick up on it. So, c'est la vie. I use TTGM. So please use that code if you're interested and you would love to contribute your voice tonight. It would be great to have it. Really briefly, what I would like to do is to show, let's put up my browser if this works. And from the last time, we actually had some interesting results. So last time we talked about World of Motion, and it turns out that 14 of you contributed to your voice, and it turns out to have a overall vote of 8.0, which is a very respectable score. Contrast that with Horizons. Obviously, Horizons has a big fandom behind it. It got 9.41. Small World had 8.41. America Sings has 8.42. So it's pretty interesting to see the results of these over time. And it gives me some confidence that what we're doing is the right thing. Having said that, I think we're going to be making some changes in the next few episodes. So keep an eye out for that. We're going to tweak the pillars a little bit. We'll see what happens. So before I get to our presentation tonight, let me pop over into chat and let's see, anybody else popped in? I think we have the usual folks here. So again, if I missed you, please holler. I will definitely note you and I'll say hi along the way. So let me hit this and let me stop the screen and I'll add our handy dandy PowerPoint and let's get to it. So tonight we're going to be talking about Test Track, an attraction many people love, and it has a very interesting history along the way. So let's get into it. Like I usually say, evaluating theme park attractions is very subjective. So we tried to make it a little bit more objective by dissecting it into 3 different pillars. These pillars are immersion, storytelling, and delight. And at the end of tonight's show, you'll see how I rate this attraction, or I should say these attractions, because there are really 3 of them. Along these 3 pillars, and we'll see how it turns out. I represent these pillars via radar plots on our website. So you can go on grandmiraculous.com and see how each attraction shapes up. This is not a monologue. Like I said in the very beginning, I need your voice. It's just me at the end of the day spouting off. It's just my opinion. So I am relying on your contributions and your interactivity to make this a community effort. So please do go to the website, use the code TTGM tonight, and you can contribute your voice as well for Test Track. Keep in mind, we're a proud member of the Disney Streamer Network, DSN. It's a fantastic initiative. So please go to dsn.disneystreams.com and you can see at any moment who's streaming. And there are many. I was logging in before. I think we had 5 or 6 different people streaming right now. So at any moment, if you're interested in something Disney, go to DSN and you can see what's going on, including us. And again, I'd like to encourage you to support the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society. There are so many people who put on such important initiatives as preserving these attractions and the memories behind them. And I really love the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society. They just had a spectacular event called Retro Magic in Florida, and they just announced that 2027 will be held in California. So that's super exciting. I can't wait to get my California friends involved as well. So please do support them or any other similar charity that tries to keep these memories alive. Okay, let's get into it. We're going to talk about Test Track tonight, which is a natural extension of what we talked about last week, which was World of Motion. So before I do like to highlight some folks. Now, Test Track is a little bit unique because it's more of a modern attraction. So we don't have many of the famous legacy voices and names that you might be familiar with. Tonight, I'm going to be highlighting 2 of them. One of them is one that you've heard from before. His name was Trevor Bryant. And as you can see here are pictures from when we highlighted him on Horizons. Well, Mr. Bryant, he worked on the Test Track version 2 that we'll talk about in a bit. And I don't need to recite his bio, but he's worked on so many amazing things, including Horizons. And we talked about his impact during the Horizons episode. So keep in mind when we talk about Test Track 2, Trevor had a direct hand in that. And also a name that we haven't heard from before, Dan Burkwell. Dan was the creative mind behind Test Track 3. So the version that just opened was basically his baby, along with other folks. Dan has a degree in production design from Savannah College of Art and Design, or SEAD, as we call it. And he's a senior production designer at Walt Disney Imagineering. And he spearheaded the 2025 redesign of Test Track at Epcot. So, like I mentioned, we're actually talking about 3 different attractions tonight. You're going to get 3 in 1 tonight. So aren't you lucky? So, of course, the original version of Test Track opened in 1999. It closed about 13 years later in April of 2012, and it was replaced that same year with version 2.0. That version lasted another 12 years, and that was closed in 2024. And of course, version 3 opened this year to much acclaim. Many people online, you've probably seen footage of it. Let me pop over to chat. I see some names popping in. Trish is here. Hey, Trish, thanks for being here. Cordy in California. It's so great to see you, Cordy. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to having Retro Magic in California. Hopefully we can have a big old meetup. So let's get on to it. So we talked about World of Motion last week. Well, World of Motion, as many attractions do, had an endpoint. And the reason for the endpoint had a lot to do with GM's situation. GM originally had a sponsorship for World of Motion for a number of years. However, as I'll talk about in a little bit, when GM's sponsorship ended, the company was going through a lot of problems. And I'll talk about what some of those problems are. GM ultimately chose to renew their sponsorship with Disney, but in exchange, they wanted a brand new attraction in place of World of Motion. This new ride would focus on, well, automobiles, instead of the history of transportation, which kind of makes sense given what GM was going through. Well, this transition led to the creation of this new attraction called Test Track, and it emphasized vehicle innovation and things that had more to do with GM's core business. Well, going back in history a little bit, GM and Disney go way back, even way back in 1976. Imagineers had trips to GM's proving grounds in Milford, Michigan. Now, Milford was a big, huge essentially a test track for many of GM's cars to go through. It was built in 1924, and it was a modern environment where many vehicles were put up to all kinds of different tests. There were 130 miles of roads, and they were built to test a vehicle very severely. In fact, they say that 1 mile at Milford equals 5 miles in real life. There were all kinds of torture tests, including something called the Seven Sisters course. And this involved extreme lateral acceleration switchbacks and things like that. And of course, it had the famous barrier crash test too that we all know and love. So back in 1976, Imagineers were toying with the idea of creating some kind of a vehicle test experience. In fact, that was originally planned for World of Motion as kind of a side attraction or kind of a post show to tell people how vehicles were being tested. However, the more humorous and honestly more aligned with the Disney attractions at the time, World of Motion was chosen to be featured instead. And the test attraction was demoted to kind of a second tier version, and then eventually it was cut entirely. Now, World of Motion lasted about 10 years, as we all know and love, but eventually its sponsorship elapsed. So you would think at the time when the sponsorship elapsed, this would be a no-brainer for GM to revisit, right? Why wouldn't GM renew their sponsorship with Disney? This was big publicity for them and for the park. It seems like a perfect partnership. So it was a no-brainer to renew, right? Well, keep in mind the time frame. We were living at about 1992, and there were some very, very bad things happening in 92. In particular, GM was going through a very hard time. They reported a loss of about $23.5 billion. That's a huge loss. At the time, in fact, it was the largest loss by any company ever made. There were severe ramifications. 21 plants were closed. 70,000 jobs were lost. It was nasty. So in the midst of that situation, GM couldn't necessarily justify a big long-term investment into a Disney sponsorship. So what they did was that they kind of went halfway. They extended their sponsorship for 1 year as a trial. The good news is that at the end of that year, their economic conditions improved, but they had a catch. In order to renew their sponsorship, they demanded a new attraction, one that was much more aligned to their core business, and one that was specifically about cars and automobiles, which makes sense. We're talking about GM here. So Disney closed World of Motion in 1996, and Test Track was planned to open in May 1997, which was supposed to be its replacement. However, that was the original plan. There were some bumps in the road, so to speak. And I just want to point out that the interaction between Disney as a company and other companies sponsoring these attractions has a large impact on the history of these attractions, something we don't often think about. So the fact that we don't have World of Motion anymore is directly tied into the fact that GM had a rough year in 1992. So it's interesting to think about how the real world affects the history of the attractions that we all know and love. Well, in 1995, Epcot announced that World of Motion would be replaced by this new attraction called Test Track. The original attraction closed in 96, and they completely cleared out the interior. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Construction began in 1995, and interior work started the year after in 96. Now, although the ride was planned to open in 97, there were many, many technical issues with the opening of Test Track. In fact, it delayed the debut of Test Track by almost 2 years. The ride vehicles themselves were styled after real-world test cars used in automobile safety evaluations, but there were some significant problems along the way. By the way, this is a quote by Philip Guarascio. Sorry, I butchered his name. He was a VP and general manager of marketing and advertising for GM. He was trying to pitch this notion of this attraction to the public. Keep in mind GM's situation at the time, which was somewhat perilous. So they were trying to sell this to the public and trying to pitch it as something directly aligned with their business. And they said, we didn't do this attraction because it feels good. We did it because it makes good business sense. So keep that in mind as we talk about this attraction tonight. Now, the construction was huge. All of the walls inside the building would be removed, and it would eventually result in one huge cavernous space inside the cylindrical building. Now, the idea for the ride was pretty aggressive. It featured ascending and descending ramps, acceleration, braking, rough terrain, and bank turns. And so what this required was a brand new vehicle system. We couldn't just put an Omnimover on there and call it good. So the vehicle system they came up with was in some ways similar to the vehicle system used in Indiana Jones. It was very similar to slot cars. You may have used some of these slot cars as a kid. So essentially, these are cars that are attached to a track with a hole down the middle, and there's a pin inside the groove that holds the car up, and that's what we call the slot in the slot cars. Now, each car has 3 onboard computers to control the ride, to track the progress, and to activate scenes around you as you go through it. So it was a great idea, and it worked very well on Indiana Jones. The difference in Indiana Jones is that on top of the slot car, the car that you were using, they built a hydraulic system to bounce and move the car around. In fact, I have a funny story about that we'll talk about when we talk about Indy. But that was a relatively slow-moving ride through Indiana Jones. Test Track, by contrast, was intended to be a high-speed attraction. And it was that exact speed aspect that became the big problem. So at the time, there was another attraction that was intended to be a high-speed attraction. And we all love this attraction, Rocket Rods in Disneyland. Well, suffice to say, the 98 opening of Rocket Rods did not go well. We talked about Rocket Rods previously when we talked about the People Mover. The budget for Rocket Rods did not allow for bank turns at all. So the cars had to constantly accelerate and decelerate. What ended up happening was that this essentially ate tires up, and it fried the control systems. So eventually this attraction was closed. Meanwhile, Disney had too much invested in Test Track, so they couldn't toss the idea of Test Track. They had to go all in and figure out how to make it work, given these speed issues that they had to deal with Rocket Rods. So thankfully, they were able to apply some know-how, and they were able to create bank turns and things like that that would make the ride less of a tire eater, so to speak. So Rocket Rods too. Test Track had a very rocky start. It faced multiple technical setbacks, and it delayed the opening of the attraction. In fact, in '97, Disney announced that the ride wouldn't open until sometime in 1998 due to issues like this. The first problem that they had to deal with involved the wheels that couldn't withstand the course's speed and stress. So there was a bigger problem too in the ride software. The ride software, as it was originally written, could only manage 6 vehicles on the attraction at a time. They were planning on 29 vehicles. So if you do the math, you think, okay, each car takes 6 people. If you can only have 6 vehicles on the ride, that's 36 people on the attraction at once. That's nothing. And that would have dropped capacity down to catastrophic levels. You would have been in line for 10 hours. So they had to fix that. There were some rumors that weather was involved, involving lots of rain in Florida, but that wasn't the case. Finally, they resolved the issues. Test Track soft opened in 1998. Unfortunately, it was still a little bit rocky after that until its official launch in 1999. Now, Test Track was one of the first single rider lines. Many of us know and love single rider lines in our attractions, but because of the continued downtime that it had, and because of the fact that the car had 6 seats in it, they were often launched with empty seats on it. So to solve this, they introduced the concept of a single rider line. Now, this wasn't the first ride with single riders, but it was one of the first ones that really innovated it. And it really reduced wait times, and it improved the overall throughput for the attraction. In fact, in 1999, they added a fast pass entrance as well. So that improved things as well. Let's talk about the first iteration of this attraction. This is Test Track version 1.0 that opened in 1999. So when you entered the building, you were first encountered with this very noisy environment, this very industrial environment. And the queue began with a walkthrough of a simulated repair and test shop. And it showcased all kinds of automotive testing procedures, from things smashing windshields and, cars hitting barriers and things like that. They had a soundproof chamber. They had all kinds of interesting things you could look at as you walk through the queue. Now, when you enter the briefing room, and I'll show what this looks like in a bit, those of you who remember this video, there was a host, Bill McKim, played by John Michael Higgins, and he explained the testing process that you would go through and introduced a technician. Her name was Sherry. Short videos illustrated each test as they described them. And what was fun about this was that the segment ended with Bill asking Sherry to add a random segment to the test track. And she hit a button, and of course, it was a crash test sequence. So that was a nice build up to the actual attraction. The ride itself experienced many different kind of environmental and track hazards. They had a hill climb. They introduced anti-lock braking by having you brake by first disabling it and then re-enabling it to show how anti-lock braking helps. There was an overlay that highlighted the difference. And then you entered what was probably one of the most intense memories for people, which was the environmental chambers. You had a heat room with 192 lamps. You had a cold room, and then you had a corrosion room. Of course, it wasn't real corrosion, but there were robots pretending to spray corrosion at you. In fact, the cold room was initially too cold for guests, so they actually had to heat it up a little bit. Of course, towards the end of the ride, we started climbing some hills, and we started going left and right around hill climbs. At the summit, you narrowly avoided a crash with a semi-truck, kind of like some other attractions you might have been on, Mr. Toads. And the final barrier, finally, you reach what looks like a barrier test. So you reach this wall, and this wall, they announced that, okay, we're going to start the barrier test. And your car starts accelerating, and you think, wait a minute, are we really going to do this? And at the final moment, before you hit the wall, the walls slide apart, and then boom, you're outside. And then you enter the high-speed track outside. Guests experienced a straightaway at that point, many turnaround, and then you raced around the building at the high speed, and this is the answer, 64.9 miles an hour, almost 65 miles an hour. And then he showed a thermal scan of the guests. And then you exited into a gift shop and GM showroom. This is an overhead view, courtesy of Park Lore, in case you're curious what the track looks like inside the cylindrical building. So you can keep in mind, they had to essentially knock out all of World of Motion and make this a big cavernous space so that they can handle the track and also the storage for the cars. So what I'd like to do is to show you some of the videos from Test Track 1.0 to jog your memory. First, I'll show you the pre-show video, and then we'll actually ride the ride. While I'm doing that, and here's the first interactive segment, I'd like to encourage you to add in chat, what memories do you have of Test Track 1.0 if you had been on it? Go ahead and contribute that in chat, and we'll talk about it afterwards.
The next group's ready.
Oh. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the test track. My name is Bill McKim. I'm up here in the control center. In just a couple of minutes, you're going to be out there on that track. But first, let's put together your test schedule. These are the same kinds of tests that are run at GM test facilities all over the world. Let's put up the 26.8 grade.
You got it.
Okay, we're going to start you off on an accelerated hill climb. Now, these steep grades give us a chance to evaluate the effects of heat and stress on your engine and on the transmission.
Twisted or blocks?
Let's put up the blocks, German and Belgian. Next, your vehicle is going to go over a variety of rough road surfaces. These are designed to test the integrity of the suspension and the chassis.
It's going to get a bit bumpy.
Yeah. Next, you're going to see and feel what it's like when your brakes lock up and you lose control of the steering. That's such a good feeling, but hang in there because we're going to do the test one more time, this time with the ABS or the anti-lock brakes.
Okay.
All right.
What's next?
Let's do some environmental tests. Put up 2, 5, and 7.
7?
Yeah, 7.
Okay.
After that, we're going to subject your vehicle to some extremes in temperature, as well as corrosive conditions, to see how it handles nature's worst. And finally, we'll take you out for some handling runs.
Off-road or corner?
Let's do the corner. I'm going to send you through some hairpin turns, and then we'll take you out and do the high-speed loops. And depending on how your vehicle and you hold up, we'll even throw a few surprise tests in there.
Surprise test?
Yeah. Pick one. Now, if this whole routine seems a bit extreme, you're absolutely right. That's what a test track is all about. The cars you drive at home are made up of over 15,000 different parts, and every one of them has to pass the test under very extreme conditions before we ever let it off that test track and out onto the road. Now, as you can imagine, safety is a big concern of ours, so
I'll pause it here because then it gets into safety measures and you've seen all that. But I want to highlight just how good of a pre-show this video is. Yeah, it may be old, it may be cliche, but it sets up what you're about to go through and it shows you exactly what phases of the test track you're going through. And the little bit at the end with the crash test is just perfect. So let's actually ride the ride.
Vehicle 4 is clear for hill climb.
okay, here we go.
The torque and transmission load data are looking good.
Great, let's proceed to the rough road tests.
You got it.
Okay, I'm going to take you right up to the cones, hit the brakes, and see if I can steer you through. Hold on.
Braking now. Okay, we're back on track.
Let's do that other sequence.
Okay, let's try it again, this time with the anti-lock brakes.
ABS reactivated. Braking.
All right, that's the way it ought to be. You see how ABS lets you keep control of the vehicle while braking? Let's demonstrate some extreme test conditions.
Oh God, no! It's warm. Oh no, now it's cold. I'm gonna get the flu.
Did you remember to turn off those robots?
Don't spit on me.
Clear for track course A.
We never get to go to track course B.
Increasing speed 10%.
It's like being on rocket rods. It
Are you
doesn't
seeing an
suck.
increase in lateral forces?
Sure am.
Oh, it's dark. All right, here's the barrier test.
Ready for the bear.
I want to point something out real quick. The fact that they actually show the car hitting the barrier test really was a nice touch, and it really heightened expectations here.
Check.
You ready for the barrier test?
Barrier test. I didn't sign up for a barrier test.
Strap on that barrier.
Hang on tight.
Cool, I've always wanted to be thermal imaged.
As long as they're heated up, let's grab a thermal image.
Will do. Cameras on.
Tyler, are you heated up?
Looks like all components are well within test parameters.
All right, that completes our test schedule. Let's download the data.
Let's see how sexy we look. That's not very sexy.
Hey, thanks for being such a great test crew.
Sorry about the commentary. That wasn't mine. But you kind of get the sense of the attraction, and you essentially rode through all of the phases that they showed you during the pre-show. Perfect follow through. Let's remove this and we'll put this back. Okay. So after the ride, you were exited the ride and you entered what was called the assembly experience. And this was designed by Bob Rogers and BRC Imagination Arts. And it essentially recreated the feel of a working assembly plant. You walk through a very industrial space where car parts, doors, things like that were moving around. There were simulated die presses, things like that. And so it basically blended the industrial feel with personal storytelling. It really connected people to what was happening in the actual assembly process. So Test Track 1.0 lasted a good long time. We have lots of good memories of it. But Test Track 2.0 came along. So eventually Test Track 1.0 was deemed to feel a little bit old. I guess you can use the phrase, even though it was completely accurate. And so what they wanted to do was to bring a fresh new feel to Test Track. And in so doing, GM decided to not just sponsor it as GM, but to apply the Chevrolet brand name to the sponsorship. And in so doing, they created lots of different changes. So in 2012, they announced a major renovation of Test Track opening in 2012, later that year in 2012. The ride sponsorship changed to Chevrolet. And now you begin in the Chevrolet Design Center. So no longer do you walk through a simulated industrial environment. You enter a bank of essentially PCs or screens in front of you. And you got about, if I remember correctly, 4 or 5 minutes to essentially design a car. So you first got to trace the outline of the car, and then you got to choose parts and things like that. Eventually, that experience ends by you riding the ride, and at the end of the ride, it showed a showroom featuring current and concept vehicles. So before Test Track 2 opened, Disney released concept art confirming that Test Track would feature 4 test categories: capability, efficiency, responsiveness, and power. Now, the ride had closed earlier in 2012. So what they did was that they had a temporary music show called Test Track All-Stars, because, you know, what reminds you of car manufacturing and testing than a group of a cappella singers, right? Well, that they lasted there until December 2012, and the updated attraction soft opened in December. The queue itself was radically different. The queue is now themed to the Chevrolet Design Studio, where you pass concept cars first. And then, like I mentioned, you entered a studio where you had stations in front of you. You had to scan your Magic Band or your park ticket. And then you got to create a custom Chevrolet concept vehicle to be, quote unquote, tested. Then you went to the actual boarding of the car. And before you boarded the car, you scanned your Magic Band or your park ticket. And this was ostensibly load your car so that you could see how it did. Now, the ride itself was, even though it was the same track, it looked completely different inside. Some people called this the Tron track because it was so kind of Tron looking and futuristic. Well, what they did was that they added some new elements. For example, they added a futuristic city through the ride. It kind of nodded to what Center Core was like when we talked about World of Motion last week. And they had some more overt advertising. For example, in the beginning of the ride, they advertised OnStar pretty heavily, which was a little bit cringy, but, you know, it was understandable. After each phase of the test, they showed a monitor that had performance scores based on how your simulated car did. These tests basically showed you different scores for the 4 different metrics that they were measuring. There were a few Easter eggs. For example, there was WED performance on a tire and a hidden Mickey and things like that. In the responsiveness test, of course, you had hairpin turns just like before, but now instead of an industrial environment, you had laser projected trees and much more Tron type of atmosphere. There were a few other nice little Easter eggs. For example, there was a sign, FN2BFRE, which of course is a nod to World of Motion, fun to be free. So the track itself was the same, but the environment was radically different, as you'll soon see. At the end of the ride, you exited and you got to scan your Magic Band or your park ticket again, and it would essentially show you the summary of how your car did. Now, there was no direct impact on the ride experience because obviously everybody chose different cars in the studios. So the ride itself was the same, but what changed was kind of the screens afterwards, and it showed you how your simulated cart did. Of course, there were lots of throwbacks to World of Motion. There were World of Motion logos all over the place. So it tied into that nostalgia as well. Let's play Test Track 2.0 and relive that version, which is fairly recent. What I'd like to encourage you to do is, I have a question for you all. Imagine that e-tickets were still used. If you had to buy an e-ticket for Test Track, how much would you be willing to pay to ride this ride? I think it's an interesting question, and it really shows you how different attractions could mean different things to different people. So let's throw this up.
Welcome to the Sim Track. We'll begin with the capability test to see how your vehicle designs perform under challenging weather and surface conditions.
Monitoring road surface. Connecting you on bar.
I think you caught the OnStar call out.
Data acquired.
Now this was a nice effect. It looks like the track was actually disappearing into the screen, but at the last minute it changed.
Let's see how your designs hold up now.
Commencing sim car off-road and extreme weather sequence.
Yeah, you'll notice how much darker the environment is.
Capability test results displayed and verified.
Now let's see how your vehicles compare when it comes to their efficiency.
Scanning sim car for Automotive. Engaging auto scan for aerodynamic efficiency. Drive systems analysis. Hyperspectral image.
They didn't capture it in the video, but if you look to the left and the right, you could see these aerodynamic lines above a mirror of yourself. It's kind of a Pepper's Ghost effect.
In progress. Calculating total environmental impact. Commencing responsiveness test.
Okay, the responsiveness data is now being synchronized.
Automated driving technology verified and active. Automated crash avoidance technology disengaged. Displaying responsiveness data.
Here comes the final test.
Energizing for power test.
Here comes the final test.
So you get the idea. The ride track itself is the exact same, but by changing the environment, you get an almost radically different attraction. And that's a key theme I want to keep coming back to is it's not just the track, folks, and it's not just the vehicle. It's the overall feel of the attraction. It's the production design. It's the feel of it. And there are some really interesting comments that I highlighted in chat. Keep it coming. By the way, thanks to TPM Vids for video. I think this was a farewell day, the last day it was up. So finally, we have Test Track 3.0, its latest version. Test Track 3.0 was announced in 2023, and they announced that they were really leaning more into the nostalgia. They were really leaning into World of Motion for this latest version. They released concept art last year in 24, and the attraction officially closed in June of 24. Now, thankfully, December, GM confirmed they would resume sponsorship, and they revealed that Test Track 3 would have new scenes, a new score, and things like that. And it finally opened to the public this year, just a few months ago in July. Now, the queue in the ride, again, pretty different from before. It was now themed as a sleek car showroom, and it really featured concept vehicles with things like that. The design studio, the monitors, all of that has been removed. However, there's a big change. When you enter the car, now you meet a male narrator, and there's a female AI car assistant that guides you through the ride. Now, the ride transitions from a cityscape into a digital world, and there are some pretty nifty effects. At the very end, or I should say the very end of the inside part of the attraction, you basically, before you enter a big room here, you pass a futuristic home, and it kind of has an homage to World of Motion. And there were some comments by the AI that were a little bit obvious. You know, the AI said, "It's always fun to be free." Hey, did you get the nostalgia reference? And finally, you enter a big dome with a huge projection of a futuristic city. Now, unlike previous versions, the door is already open. You can see it here. So you just pause in the dome a little bit, and then you zoom outside. And finally, after the show, you see a big mural inspired by 82 Epcot, and it prominently displays World of Motion logo, lots more throwbacks like that to please us nostalgia fans. Now, unlike the other two, I'm not going to show the video because I know some of you haven't ridden it yet, and you may not want to be spoiled. So I'm not going to show it here. There are plenty of places online. In fact, I added a video to our playlist if you'd like to watch it. So to sum up, to talk about the attraction a little bit, it was really very much a technological milestone. This was the first Disney attraction to really simulate real-world automotive testing using slot car style vehicles. It introduced variable ride programming, performance scoring, things like that. And it pushed the boundaries of ride system design. There were 3 computers on board just to maintain all the software that was managing all of the vehicles simultaneously. It was kind of a proof of concept to how to integrate industrial realism into themed entertainment. And for that purpose, it gets a lot of credit. It inspired future attractions. All of us who love Radiator Springs Racers in Disneyland, that's the exact same ride vehicle concept. And to a degree, it inspired Tron as well. Of course, it became Epcot's signature thrill ride. As I mentioned before, Epcot was transforming itself. It was turning into more of a thrill ride park. Now, whether that's good or bad, we can talk about at much more greater length at another time. But for the moment, consider that it achieved its purpose. It really brought a high-speed thrill ride to Epcot. And so, as a result, some of you who may remember the long waits for this attraction, it definitely hit its goal. The outdoor speed loop became kind of an icon. You can almost hear these cars from all over Future World going vroom every few minutes. So it was a big attractor from that perspective. Of course, it was one of the first rides to introduce a single rider line and fast pass and things like that. Each version of Test Track was considerably different, as you could see from the videos tonight. It changed you from a passive observer to an active designer and back. So we'll talk about this in a few more minutes. It basically became a favorite attraction for many people because it blended education, speed, and personalization. It had enduring popularity. It's one of Epcot's most consistently popular attraction. It helped redefine what a thrill ride should be. Now, whether that thrill ride belongs in Epcot or not, we'll have that discussion another day. But For the purpose of what it was trying to do, it hit its mark. Its ride system was iconic. It created lots of other attractions. I've already mentioned Radiator Springs Racers. There's another ride in Disney Sea that was inspired by it called Journey to the Center of the Earth. And yeah, it impacts a lot of attractions around the world. And in many ways, it serves as an archive of what Epcot is trying to do. It tries to inspire curiosity, celebrate progress, and honor the legacy of motion. Sometimes they lean too much into the nostalgia aspect, especially with this latest version. But for the most part, it does what it tries to achieve. Before I get into ride analysis, I want to focus on chat. I saw some new folks come in. Mr. David T is in the house. Thank you for being here, David. Great to see you. Park Bros is in the house. Hey, Lawrence, thank you for being here. I saw Mark Langenkamp. I highlighted some of his comments. Dave Stragand is here. Hey, Dave. Hope you're doing fantastic. And I hope you all enjoyed the show so far. So let's get into our usual analysis. I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently because remember, we had 3 different attractions here. Even though it's the same track, it almost feels like 3 completely different rides. So I'll be dissecting these across all 3 versions. First, immersion. I'm going to give the first version of Test Track a very high score, 9. Now you may think, wow, that's strange. It was basically a big industrial environment. Yeah, that's what it was trying to accomplish. And to that score, it achieved it very well. It had industrial aesthetic, had very stark lighting. Inside, it looked like a test track. It looked really grimy and dingy, and it achieved its purpose. I especially love, well, I'll get to that in a second, but I love the fact that they show you the crash car before the barrier test. I think in Test Track 2, and I saw some comments in chat, I think we dipped a little bit. They focused a little bit too much on the sleek digital aesthetic. And in many ways, it was a little bit too abstract. It kind of took away the feel that you were on this test track and you were testing cars out. Instead, you were suddenly inside this Tron-like environment, and they didn't explain that very well. Test Track 3.0, I will give it a little bit higher notch. I think it does a better job than Test Track 2.0. It definitely has a nicer aesthetic to it. And what's cool about it is that it brings optimism and futurism to the story, and it brings back a lot of those story beats and concepts from World of Motion. However, the scene transitions are still a little bit uneven, and it doesn't really explain to you what you're trying to do through all of these twists and turns. So I've got to give the nod to the first version in terms of immersion. Storytelling, similar story. 1.0 was a very, very clear linear storyline. Like I mentioned, it showed you in the pre-show what it was trying to accomplish, what you would be going through. And it showed you very clearly that you were test subjects in a real world facility that looked like one. And that was a story being told. Test Track 2.0 tried to cast you as more of a designer, as someone who's involved intimately with the creation of these cars. However, they didn't really close the loop with this concept of designing your car and the actual ride. Yes, there were screens that showed scores and things like that, but it was pretty disconnected from what you went through. And there was very little feedback or impact during the ride itself from your choices in the design studio. Test Track 3.0 improved things just like before. Hopefully you can still hear me. I got too excited there. Test Track 3 was a loose journey through kind of these imagined dreamscapes and landscapes. It looks very beautiful. It looks very pretty, but it kind of lacks a clear beginning, middle, and end from a storytelling beat perspective. Thank you, Bitritz. I'll try not to drop the mic and get too excited. From a delight point of view, pretty high scores for all 3. Test Track 1 was great because you had the different environments. You had the heat and cold chambers. The barrier test I really love, especially the build up to it. And of course, the 65 miles per hour speed burst was innovative at the time. Test Track 2.0, it had all the kind of ride beats or the actual attraction beats of the original. But it kind of was emotionally flat at the end of the day. I've seen some comments in chat that I really agree with. The abstract environments didn't really make you as excited for the ride as the previous version could have. And Test Track 3, I'll give it the same. I'll give it the same rating. It evokes a sense of wonder about the future, but it really lacks personal stakes or character-driven moments. So thank you, Ride Tracks. Appreciate you being here. Thanks for that kind comment. So on par, hey, my bias is clear. I like the first version the best for many reasons. It was unapologetically industrial. It was trying to do what its mission was to show you how cars were tested in a very grimy, very dirty environment. And the story beats that it told were pretty great. Test Track 2 and 3 tried to elevate the experience by changing the environment to be more modern. But I think along the way, somehow the attraction lost some of its magic. It's still a great ride, don't get me wrong, and I'll easily ride any of these versions any day of the week. But it's an interesting point to think about that by simply changing the environment of a ride, you can very substantially change the outcome of it and change whether it achieves its mission or not. So overall, if I were to average all these up, I would give Test Track a 6.95. It would be a much higher score if I were only evaluating 1.0. But I think the later versions kind of dragged it down a little bit, to be honest. It's still a great ride, don't get me wrong. But I would love to see it return to some of its roots and some of its storytelling beats. Those of you, I saw the answers right in the beginning. Yes, 65 miles per hour. Test Track is the fastest ride on Disney property. And you definitely feel it, especially when you're racing around that corner right there. Thankfully, they added bank tracks, unlike Rocket Rods. So we have a good experience for that. So I hope you enjoyed our trip through Test Track history and lore. I thought a lot about what to do next. We've spent a lot of time in Epcot. We've talked about Horizons, talked about World of Motion. Now it became Test Track. So I want to bring it back to the original theme parks. And I thought, okay, what's a good ride to really carry forward the notion of a fast ride, a notion involving fast cars? Well, you could think Autopia. We could even cover Rocket Rods. But I think there's only one ride that people really love and hold dear in their hearts, involving a character who loves fast cars. And of course, that's Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. So episode 19, we're going to talk about this beloved attraction next week, talk about its history, talk about its dual track in Florida. There's lots to talk about with this attraction. So I hope you join me next week. And I can happily say that we'll be visiting hell next week. So I hope you all enjoy next week. Hope you come back for it. And we're going to have lots of fun talking about this famous attraction. So I'll close with our usual commentary from Mr. Bradbury. Gather round the next great campfire. Let us seek and know and understand or dream a new book, a new instruction book, to fly a great spaceship Earth through the uncharted seas of the future world. Lock in a dream that is your own. Find what truth is in your blood and beat a path from here to there. Your life is yours to own and be. The world is yours to shape and change. The stars are yours as just reward. Thank you so much for being here. Please hit like, please share us out, and hit subscribe. We are very, very close to 500 subscribers, and I want to celebrate that with you all next week. So let's try and get over that big milestone. And I hope you have a wonderful week and come back, and we'll take some rides with Mr. Toad. Hope you all are well.